you can spend thousands of dollars on cheater parts. You know, messing with your fuel, messing with tires, building carbs, full engines, and all trying to get an edge on everyone else that, since they're beating you, they must be cheating too, right? But maybe there's a better place to spend your money. Let's get into it. There is nothing that you can just go out and buy or manipulate that is going to completely change your fortunes on track unless something is broken. The truth is that mediocre engines win races all of the time, including top-level races. So what should you be doing instead? Well, the short answer is take that money that you were gonna spend on whatever cheater nonsense that you were looking at, buy yourself a track pass, get as many race-old, 2 race-old tires you can get your hands on, and go out there and test. Heck, if you can, get yourself a mechanic/coach for a day or two, and make sure you're taking notes. Because speed doesn't come from a cheat, it comes from getting better. And the first thing you need to understand is where your speed is actually coming from. I think we all kind of understand that lap time comes from average speed. They are one and the same. It's distance over time. But understanding how an average comes together doesn't seem to be so straightforward. The shiny number everybody's looking at is peak top speed, the absolute top speed that you got at the end of that straightaway. Because that peak speed is just one part of your average calculation, you also need to look at your slowest speed and how long you are maintaining those speeds throughout the lap. They all make a difference. Remember, it's over time. Now, true peak top speed is the hardest thing to attain, because the actual limitation in karting, for the most part, is aerodynamic. And the thing about aerodynamic drag is that it doesn't move up in this linear fashion where half a horsepower gains a mile an hour each time or a kilometer an hour each jump. You know, from 60 to 61 might be half a horsepower. 61 to 62 might be a full horsepower. 62 to 63 might be 4 horsepower. It is not a linear progression. And sure, finding more power will increase your average speed, but the amount of power that you need to gain to make a meaningful difference over a lap is actually quite significant. That's going to be hard to get without getting yourself caught and tossed. And I'm not saying aerodynamic bodywork is the answer to everything or anything. In fact, the people that have like the best aero that they can possibly put together will still throw a camera with a giant camera mount and it won't make any difference to their lap time. And if you don't think those mounts and cameras make a difference, hold one out your window at 60 kilometers an hour and tell me if it's making any difference to your hand. There is a better way. What you need to focus on is finding time in the corners. That's going to be where you get the biggest difference in your lap time. Now, track time is your #1 development tool, but just going out there and running laps isn't good enough. You need to have a plan. And that plan needs to focus on 3 things: corners, control, and chassis. To start off, when you get out there, you want to have as neutral a chassis setup as you can get. Go out, do a couple of quick runs, just a few short laps. You don't need a whole bunch of time here. And just get the chassis set up in a way that feels comfortable, something that you would be happy to start your race day with. And that's where you're going to start. Every corner on every racetrack is different, and you need to figure out how to get around them. You need to push hard and learn the limits, and that means going past those limits. Push your braking points. Try different turn-ins, try different techniques in getting through the corners. Figure out if there's a bump you can avoid, maybe the curb works, maybe it doesn't. Try late and early apexes, true apexes. See what you can find. Try just a couple of corners each lap where you can focus in on doing different things each time and see what works best. What you might find is that there's some potential for better racing lines that you hadn't even considered on that racetrack. But your work as a driver isn't done. You need to take it a step further. Now, after a while, as you're trying these different things, you're going to learn something about the chassis setup that you have. Maybe it's pushing, maybe it's loose, maybe it feels really stable, maybe it feels really unpredictable and hard to drive. And you should have found a reasonably fast line around the racetrack, given that setup, that you can repeat. But before you go changing that setup, I want you to try something else. I want you to change how you drive. All of the best drivers in the world have slow hands. they seem to barely turn the wheel while they're actually out there on track. That's because they drive as much with their feet as they do with their hands. That isn't magic. And that isn't certainly some cheat that you can buy. That is a skill that you need to learn. And the way that you're going to learn that is being out on that racetrack and changing the way that you use your feet and your steering at the same time. If it pushes, try to make it stop. If it's loose, try to make that stop. See what you can do to overcome that. What happens if you turn while braking? What happens if you jump off the brakes before you put any steering input? What happens if you lean one way or the other? What happens if you try the Scandi flick, which is, if it's a left-hand corner, under braking, you put a little bit of right steering input, and then you snap back to the left as you jump off the brake. Try all of these things that you wouldn't normally consider being possible, and really work that kart, really work your hands and your feet, and figure out what all of those different kinds of inputs feel like. See if you can make it faster just by changing those inputs. And now, once you've gotten yourself out there, you've done a lot of different things, you've figured out some different techniques that work, different techniques that maybe didn't in that situation, now you have the opportunity to move on. Now start focusing on what it was in the chassis that you were trying to overcome and see what you can do to fix it. But don't just focus on the end that's the problem. If it's loose, what happens if you make an adjustment at the front? If it's tight, do the opposite. You know, this is a great time to try torsion bars or taking them off, lateral bars, seat bars. See what happens if you tighten the floor pan or loosen the front of it or just the back. Just make some adjustments generally around the kart based on what you understand with that chassis is going to work. But how that actually translates in the chassis itself is based on what you're actually going to try. How does a front torsion bar feel different than a rear torsion bar or a lateral bar under the seat? Or if you're doing something with the front track, what does that actually feel like on the track that you're on? And as you're doing this, you want to make one change at a time. Don't do a bunch of changes at once because you have no idea what change worked, if any of them. And for all you know, one change canceled out the other, or made it even worse, they double up. And of course, as you're doing all this, you need to be tracking those changes. You want to have an information database that you can look at in the future and that you can start to understand. There are data sheets that you can get online for free, you can make one yourself, but they all have kind of the basic things. What are the physical things on the kart that you can change? They should all have a category. What is the temperature, the weather, the time? But remember that you don't need to completely fill out a sheet throughout a day. You'll have one master sheet that has all of the settings on the kart. And then for each subsequent run, all you have to do is number them for each run and just fill in the part that you changed. It's gonna save you a whole lot of time. It seems obvious, but I mean, as somebody who used to make that mistake, it makes a huge amount of time difference. Remember, limit your variables. One, maybe at max two things, like if you know that you have a gearing issue and a setup issue, you can push it, but personally, I would just be doing one of those at a time. And then once you've got all of this information together, you've run through this at least once. Now what you do is you start all over again. Every time you make an adjustment to that chassis, you go right back to the top. You go out there and try new things in the corners. And then you try new things with the steering inputs and everything. And then you go back to your chassis changes. As you cycle through this, you'll feel that the kart wants to do something, but you'll also realize that you can feel that there's a faster line there if you can just get the kart to do what you want. And then you can make the chassis change so that you can find the line you want, and the chassis will do it in the way that feels best and is fastest on that stopwatch. Now do notice that I said fastest on the stopwatch, because just because something feels stable doesn't mean it's fast. And just because something feels like a basket case doesn't mean it's slow. And especially with those basket case cases, there tends to be a lot of speed there. If you can figure out how to control that kart with your hands and your feet and your body to make it work. And the last thing you want to do before you leave at the end of the day is save a little bit of time to do something stupid. Put a bizarre, weird setup on it. Maybe something that you've thought about that might work. If you don't know the story of Jeff Gordon's T-Rex car and how they figured out how to make it work on track by throwing a really bizarre setup on the thing, I'm gonna leave a link somewhere so that you can hear that story. But the point is that they tried something. They tried something that wasn't intuitive and nobody was doing, and it worked. Throw bars on it, throw the bars off it, try completely wide in the front, narrow in the back, try different floor pans, try different axle combinations, just try things and give it an honest chance. Get out there, see how you can drive it the best the way it is, and then start going through your cycle of figuring out how that chassis wants to get around the track and how you can optimize it with setups to make it better and better. Are you gonna go out there and find a setup that nobody's ever thought of? I mean, maybe, probably not. But most likely what you're gonna do is go out there and figure out how to drive a chassis that is an absolute bag of crazy. And you're gonna understand better what it feels like and how to get that chassis back to where it needs to be. Because if you can learn how to get the best out of what you have, you're better off than a cheater who can't. Four-cycle racers have very limited power, and the amount of power that you have to add to overcome the kind of aerodynamic issues that it has really isn't something that's attainable in a reasonable way. But on track, learning how to drive is something that you can absolutely do to get yourself in a better position. In two-cycle, even though you have the power to get yourself out of trouble here and there, the tires are usually the biggest limitation. And you'll notice that the driver who's out there with the lowest tire pressures, who can get them up to temperature fast, and yet throughout the race gets smoother and smoother and still maintains pace without overheating those tires, is the driver who ends up winning. You know, think about that driver that's out there chirping tires early and then really smooths out as they go, as they've built the temperature into the tires and they're trying to maintain them for the rest of the race, versus that driver who's pushing the whole race, chirping and really sawing at the wheel, who fades early. That's the difference. And you'll notice that whether it's four or two cycle, those elite drivers have those nice slow hands. They're driving as much with their feet as they are with their hands. They understand how to get the best out of what they have, and the way they did that was learning. At best, cheating is a band-aid for people who just don't have it. Do you? But what do you think? What's a good strategy for developing yourself for getting faster on the racetrack? Is there a better way to learn than what I laid out? Let me know down below. Otherwise, like, subscribe, share, comment, do all those wonderful things. And as always, I will see you at the racetrack.